Hello and welcome. I'm Reverend Susan at Knox United Church in Embro, Ontario. This is the reflection for Sunday, November the 8th, 2020. This week's chapter in the book, We Make the Road by Walking, is titled, From Ugliness, a Beauty Emerges. And as I began to read it, I struggled with this image. I wanted to ask McLaren, does it? Has it? Has a beauty emerged from the ugliness of war, violence, prejudice, racism, homophobia, xenophobia, sexism, injustices, discrimination, genocide, a global pandemic? As my friend and colleague, Reverend Nita Spiller writes, these are difficult days across the world, aren't they? So much war, so much anger, so much distrust from nation to nation, from culture to culture. So much hatred and violence perpetrated against God's people and the planet. At a national level, we see white fishing companies and its leaders lighting an indigenous community's lobster stock warehouse on fire. At a more frightening level, we see world leaders posturing and issuing threats to one another, bringing the world to the brink of catastrophe. We only need to look at the USA to see white supremacists and Nazi sympathizers in Charlottesville invoking violence to try and defend a heritage that is simply indefensible. And time again, we see refugees and immigrants scapegoated for so many of the ills in society across so many countries, and displaced, vulnerable people so often being treated no better than animals. End quote. In the Exodus story, we hear about how Moses has led his people, God's chosen people, the slaves of Egypt, the Israelites, out of Egypt to their freedom. It doesn't exactly happen overnight. The Israelites wandered through the wilderness for 40 years, generations, in fact. And Moses doesn't even live long enough to get to see the promised land. But he started the process. He sowed the seeds. He took the first steps in their making their road to freedom by walking, literally. And then when these tired, fed up, frustrated Israelites finally make it to the promised land, there is a bit of a snag. There are people already living there. But no worries, they are God's chosen people, and they have been freed from their oppressors by God, so they are granted this one time only to conquer just enough land for themselves. It seems impossible. But the Israelites, led now by Joshua after the death of Moses, trust in their God to give them victory. So what exactly should we think of when we are faced with parts of the Bible that claim that there is such thing as God-sanctioned war and God-powered victories? Here we are faced with one of life's most problematic questions, the question of violence. Violence is, by definition, behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So does that mean God helps some people by harming others? McLaren asks, is God part of the violence in the world? And is violence part of God? I'm a bit confused. How about you? Last week, we heard about the 10 Commandments that God gave the Israelites, as told by McLaren. Put the God of liberation first. Don't reduce God to the manageable size of an idol. Do not use God for your own agendas. Honor the God of liberation by taking and giving everyone a day off. Turn from self-centeredness by honoring your parents. Don't kill people. Don't do things that frequently incite violence, including don't cheat with others' spouses, don't steal others' possessions, and don't lie about others' behaviors or characters. In fact, if you really want to avoid the violence of the old slave economy, deal with its root source, the drama of desire. Don't let the competitive desire to acquire tempt you off the road of freedom. End quote. And then the Israelites reach the promised land and prepare for battle. And all the while, they're reminded that they must treat aliens and strangers as neighbors and remember that they were once oppressed, and so they better not become oppressors themselves. So then what do we make of Deuteronomy 7, where Joshua overtakes and conquers Canaan? After God has given the Israelites the victory, let me read to you the next instructions. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. This is what you are to do to them. Break down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their idols in the fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possessions. So no wonder that the ancient peoples, people of faith throughout the centuries, and even people today somehow justify and claim that God commands and blesses the annihilation of them for the good of us. Here is an example of that dangerous dualistic thinking. When there are two opposing sports teams, both praying to God for victory, to which side does God grant that victory? Us or them? Well, we can acknowledge that in the minds of the originators of these stories, God, as they understood God, did indeed command those things. We can acknowledge that in their way of thinking, divine involvement in war was to be expected, offering comfort and reassurance in a vision of a God who would harm or kill them to defend, help, or avenge us. We can try to empathize, remembering that when human beings suffer indignity, injustice, dehumanization, and violence, they naturally pray for revenge and dream of retribution against those who harm them. Without condoning, we can at least understand why they saw God as they did, or why some people still see God that way, knowing that if we had walked in their sandals, we would have been no different. But we don't have to stop there. We don't have to stop at the ugliness. We don't and shouldn't stop at we will remember, because as we are reminded in the video, the intent behind Remembrance Day is not to glorify war. It is to reflect upon those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. We need to remember what happened in the past so we don't revert to those ways in the future. We say, in addition to we will remember, lest we forget. Lest. With the intention of preventing something undesirable, to avoid the risk of something undesirable happening again. We can then turn to other voices in the biblical library who in different circumstances told competing stories to give a different, and we can say a better, vision of God. In the book of Matthew, the story of the Canaanite woman is told. It is this story that we see a beauty emerge. And what is the significance of her being a Canaanite? Well, the Israelites entered their promised land, Canaan, and were instructed, it says, by God to commit genocide. But here she is, centuries later, in a story, talking with Jesus. The story of Jesus' healing the daughter of the Canaanite woman becomes a pivotal story. She is asking for the one thing that was denied her ancestors: mercy for her daughter. This woman is suffering. She has asked for help. We see Jesus recognize her genuine faith, and he hears God's call to extend mercy to her. I feel we are meant to hear her story today, because often when we remember stories of war, it isn't the stories of the women and children so affected by war, left behind, or those who served and were unnamed, those who suffer on all sides. In the story following the Canaanite woman, Jesus then goes to those who are not members of his religion or culture. What was an exception with the Canaanite woman is now the new rule. Don't kill the other. Show them mercy. Jesus then repeats the miracle of the multiplying of the loaves and fishes, so the crowds that have gathered to be healed by Jesus can eat. In the previous miracle, there were 12 baskets left over, suggesting the 12 tribes of Israel, the descendants, that is, of Jacob and his 12 sons. In this miracle, there are 7 baskets left over, suggesting, and it seems quite clear, the 7 Canaanite nations that Jesus' ancestors had been commanded to destroy. Our ancestors, led by Moses and Joshua, believed God sent them into the world in conquest, to show no mercy to their enemies, to defeat and kill them. But now, following Christ, we believe God sends us into the world in compassion, to show mercy, to heal, to feed, to nurture and protect life rather than to take it, to love our neighbor as ourselves. No longer is there us against them. We must make a way together. Because of Jesus's radical action of mercy, bridge building, and peacemaking, they all ate, Gentiles and Jews, separated by faith, belief, history, conflict, and yet they were all fed together. Christ's way calls us into the unknown, into embracing the others as our brothers and sisters, and to not be afraid, even as we make this risky, challenging road by walking. I give McLaren the last words today, and I quote, "Violence like slavery and racism was normative in our past and is still all too common in the present. How will we tell the stories of our past in ways that make our future less violent? We must not defend the stories or give them the final word, nor can we cover them up, hiding them like a loaded gun in a drawer that can be found and used to harm. Instead, we must expose these violent stories to the light of day. And then we must tell new stories beside them, stories so beautiful and good that they will turn us toward a better vision of kindness, reconciliation, and peace for our future and our children's future. The stories of Jesus' life and teaching, wisely told, can help us imagine and create a more peaceful future. They help us to see the glory of God shining in the face of a kind, forgiving, gentle, and non-violent man, and in the smiles and tears, words and deeds of those who radiate his love. End quote. Thanks be to God. Amen.